Now, today, it's going to be a story from France. It is titled The Necklace, written by Guy de Maupassant, who was probably the most famous short story writer in French in the 19th century. It tells the story of Madame Mathilde Loisel. She was young and pretty and charming, and she felt that the world owed her attention. Unfortunately, she was married into a family of very humble government clerks. She accepted her fate, but she was never happy with it. She always dreamt of what a wonderful, vivacious social life she could have led if only she had been married better to a person who occupied a higher station in life. She accepted her fate grudgingly, complainingly, though her husband tried to make her happy in every little way he could within his straitened means. One day, he tried to delight her by bringing home a specially procured invitation from the Minister of Higher Education. He worked in the Ministry of Higher Education, and there was a printed card saying that Monsieur and Madame Loisel had been invited to a dinner that was being hosted by the minister himself. And he thought that his wife would be absolutely delighted to have such an invitation, but she pulled a long face and tears came to her eyes and said, "I cannot possibly go to this dinner." And he said, "Why not? I had to go to a great deal of trouble to procure this invitation. Ordinary clerks are usually not invited to the minister's house." And she said, "But what will I wear? I have nothing suitable to wear to the party. What will people say?" And she was thinking of how charmingly, how attractively, how gorgeously other wives would be dressed, and how so many men would pay gallant attention to her and be impressed by her charms and glad to dance with her. And she said a very firm no. "I cannot possibly go like this." And he said, "Well, let me try. How much do you need to buy a good dress for yourself?" And she calculated and quoted a figure which she thought he would be able to afford within his means. She said, "Well, 400 francs at least." And he blanched a little because he knew that that was the exact sum that he had saved over several years in the hope of buying an air gun for herself with which he could go shooting occasionally on weekends and holidays with his friends. But he gallantly said, "All right, I'll buy you a good dress for 400 francs. And so it was done. And then as the day of the party came nearer, she said, "But I still can't go. I have no jewelry to wear. And how can I go like this? What will other wives think of me and say about me behind my back?" And he sat cross-eyed for a while, thinking very hard. And then he said, "But of course, I've got an idea. You've got such a good friend, Madame Forestier. She has been your school friend for so many years, and she's rich, and she has lots of jewelry. Surely you can ask her to lend you some piece of jewelry for just one night." And she was thrilled by the idea and immediately ran to meet her friend, Madame Forestier. And Madame Forestier was gracious enough to show her all her jewels and said, "Choose whichever you like." And she chose a wonderful, beautifully designed diamond necklace for herself, just for that one night. And so it happened that they went to the party, and she got exactly the kind of reception that she had dreamt of all her life. So many men paid attention to her and wanted to dance with her and wanted to be introduced to her and wanted to pull her aside from the crowd to talk privately to her and fix appointments with her. And she was on top of the world, on cloud nine, and thought again and again how wonderful all this is, how I am enjoying myself. I was born to this kind of life. How I wish that this could happen every night, all through the year. And so by the time the party ended, very late into the night or early into the morning, they were exhausted and it was time to say goodbye. Then they went out, and Madame Loisel did not want to be seen by all the other leaving women wearing her old stole over her costly dress. So she hid in the shadows and then accompanied her husband across the street to find a cab to take them home. And the carriage left her at their home, and when they were undressing, about to go to bed, Madame Loisel suddenly looked at herself in the mirror, and her hand flew to her breast, and she said, "Oh my God, where is the necklace?" And both of them were aghast. Obviously, they had lost the necklace somewhere on the way. And Monsieur Loisel ran around like a madman trying to trace the cab in which they had travelled, inspecting every inch of the way again to the minister's house and back, hoping to find the necklace lying somewhere, even in the gutter. But of course, it could not be found. The next day, they were in utter despair. And Monsieur Loisel informed the police and talked to every cab driver that he could find, and put out an advertisement in the newspaper offering a reward for anybody who could return the necklace. But nothing happened. And afterwards, he told his wife, well, what is done is done. We'll have to replace the necklace. There are no two ways about it. And they went around to talk to jewelers and finally found out that an exact replica of that diamond necklace would be worth 40,000 francs. And he told his wife, well, we'll have to make good. Go tell your friend that we'll be a little late in returning because a clasp has come loose and it has to be replaced. And then he took ruinous loans from as many people he could find, moneyed people, whether his friends or professional moneylenders, and he promised absurd interests and sold off every bit of his savings that he had. And then he took an extra job in the nights, and they moved out to live in a very poor house, and they got rid of the maid, and they started living the life of a very ordinary, very humble working class people. And years rolled by, and Madame Loisel got used to the kind of life that a really hard-working poor housewife leads. This is the point from which I'm going to read exactly as the author wrote. She knew the life. Madame Loisel now knew the horrible life of necessity. She did her part, however, completely, heroically. It was necessary to pay this frightful debt. She would pay it. They sent away the maid, they changed their lodgings, they rented some rooms under a poor house. She learned the heavy cares of household, the odious work of the kitchen. She washed the dishes, using her rosy nails upon the greasy pots and the bottoms of the stew pans. She washed the soiled linen, the chemises and the dishcloths, which she hung on the line to dry. She took down the refuse to the street each morning and brought up the water with her own hands, stopping at each landing to breathe. And clothed like a woman of the people, she went to the grocers, the butchers and the fruiterers with her basket on her arm, shopping, haggling to the last sou of her miserable money. Every month it was necessary to renew some notes, thus obtaining time to pay the others. The husband worked evenings, putting the books of some merchants in order, and nights he often did copying at 5 sous a page. And this life lasted for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, they had restored all, with interest of the usurer and accumulated interest besides. Madame Loisel seemed and looked old now. She had become a strong, hard, rough woman, the crude woman of the poor household. Her hair badly dressed, her skirts awry, her hands red. She spoke in a loud tone and washed the floors with large pails of water. But sometimes, when her husband was at the office, she would seat herself before the window and think of that evening party of former times, of that ball where she was so beautiful and so flattered, just for one night. How would it have been if she had not lost that necklace? Who knows? Who knows? How singular is life and how full of changes. How small a thing will ruin or save one. One Sunday, as she was taking a walk in the Champs-Élysées, that's the most famous street in Paris, to rid herself of the cares of the week, she suddenly perceived a woman walking with a child. It was Madame Forestier, still looking young, still pretty, still attractive. Madame Loisel was affected. Should she speak to her friend? Yes, certainly. Why not? Now that she had paid, she would tell her all. Why not? She approached her. Good morning, Jeanne. Her friend did not recognize her and was astonished to be so familiarly addressed by this common personage. She stammered, But, madame, I do not know. You must be mistaken. No, I am Mathilde Loisel. Her friend uttered a cry of astonishment. Oh, my poor Mathilde, how you have changed. Yes, I have had some hard days since I saw you and some miserable ones, and it's all because of you. Because of me? How is that? You recall the diamond necklace that you loaned me to wear to the commissioner's ball? Of course, very well. Well, I lost it. How is that, since you returned it to me? I returned another to you exactly like it, and it has taken us 10 years to pay for it. You can understand that it was not easy for us who had nothing, but it is finished, and I am decently content. Madame Forestier stopped short. She said, "You say that you bought a diamond necklace to replace mine." "Yes, you did not perceive it then? They were just alike." And she smiled with a proud and simple joy. Madame Forestier was deeply touched and took both hands as she replied, "Oh, my poor Matilda, my poor Matilda, mine were false. They were not worth even 500 francs. Now, I remember long ago, this story was prescribed for the ICSE examination, and I dealt with it with children in the 9th and 10th grade when they were 15, 16 years old. I remember when I first read out the story to them aloud and came to the ending, they laughed. Yes, they laughed. The sheer, immeasurable, unbearable horror of a life that was completely ruined by blind chance made them laugh. And I think today a story like this is more relevant than ever because so many people around me, I can see with my own eyes, are ruining their lives by trying to merely show off, to live more grandly than they can afford, and gradually sinking deeper and deeper into the quagmire, the quicksand of debt from which they can never get out. I often say that stories like this are prescribed for children, but the lessons learned from them, if remembered, should be of enormous use and value to them for the rest of their lives. I hope the lesson learned from a story like this, and an undying classic like this, would be learned and remembered by lots of people, and definitely all my listeners. That's enough for today.